Hi, hey everyone. As you probably already got, my name is Maxime. I work for the RIPE NCC and I'm based in Moscow and basically cover the eastern parts of the RIPE NCC service region, Russia including. And today I want us to talk about the regulatory trends in Russia, and I believe that trend can be named with one word as sovereignty. So let's begin. I don't think we have that much time, but I'll try to be quick. And here I listed the all recent initiatives and proposals, but of course not all of them. We would be able to talk only about the first five listed here. We won't have time to talk about some other initiatives like user registrations for instant messengers, taxation of e-services, ITU raise, but we will try to cover the major recent legislation or proposals to give you an idea of what that trend, which I call sovereignty, means in Russia and how is that connected to everything happening in the world. So the first, not by the influence, but by the date of introduction, is the regulation, which is part of the so-called anti-terrorists package, which was introduced 5 years ago already, and it's about the data collection and storage. So under that regulation, operators must store logs for 3 years. So basically, every time certain devices connected to certain web service. That is a log that metadata needs to be stored for 3 years for the law enforcement agencies to have access to and to be able to follow through. But that's not it. Also, the content of electronic communications such as voice, images, text, audio, video, you name it, they have to be stored for 6 months. Obviously, that's an enormous amount of data, and which is why there's another regulation that says, another part of that regulation that says that not only data needs to be stored, but it also has to be stored using only locally certified data storage equipment, and the capacity needs to be increased by 15% every year, as we all understand that we produce more and more content every year. So that, again, results in enormous volumes of data that needs to be stored. That's why, hence, that requirement that it needs to be, the storage capacity needs to be increased every year, which is, of course, make operators less than happy because basically they are the ones paying for that. So that's that. And one important notion here is that law enforcement agencies are granted direct access to that data. So basically, there is no involvement from the ISP on their side at all. They only need to store the data, and that's it. That's where the threshold is. Everything else is up to law enforcement agencies, how they access it, when, what they do with it, how do they sort through that massive big data. All of that is none of the concern of the operator. Next, sovereign internet law. You might have heard about that. It was relatively famous in the press. It's again, relatively new, only 2 years old, 2.5. And it actually has a lot in that law. I'll try to cover the most important parts. That also relates to the internet governance and to the technical community. So under that regulation, all ASNs, all IP blocks needs to be registered with the regulator, as well as all the infrastructure, routing policies, everything. So basically a local database of all resources, of all internet-related resources and information needs to be stored in this local database. Again, as you might imagine, people, the technical community and operators, ISPs, are very unhappy with that regulation. Also because it's very broad, but not just that. It also has a very large fines. It provides very large fines for those who do not follow that regulation. And we as RIPE NCC, obviously, we're the ones that allocate internet resources, namely IP blocks and autonomous system numbers. We do see a rather sharp decline in the number of ASNs used by Russian entities. A couple of years ago, Russia used to be the second market after US in terms of the sheer number of autonomous system numbers. That's not the case anymore because we do see a lot of ASN holders preferring to return the ASN, to stop using the autonomous system number, just to not fall under that regulation. Because like I said, not just the administrative load, but it can also be a very, well, not cheap if you do not follow that regulation properly. Next, the IXPs, they also must register, and only registered IXPs are allowed to be used to peer by the ISPs. So again, this is something very novel, and it's also might be interesting to note that the largest IXP in Russia, MSK-IX, and the fourth largest IXP in the world, is also owned by the state incumbent, Rostelecom. It's a state telecom company. This is just the context for you to understand more the environment. Next, that local database that I mentioned is basically a RIPE database is used as a model for that local database. It looks very much the same. It uses pretty much the same data within that database. And actually, when an autonomous system holder receives a message to fill in the data into the local Russian database, there is a possibility to actually directly transfer data from the RIPE database to the local Russian database. And as you might imagine, creating local databases might cause issues, including technical issues with the routing and connectivity. And one of the biggest concerns for us was if the integrity of the RIPE database is intact. And we were told by the authorities that RIPE database is seen as the only authoritative source of information about address space and rights about who holds which address space and resource. That's hugely important because, like I said, if we start finding that any local database has an information or data that does not coincide with the RIPE database, then we might see issues on the connectivity side, on the routing side, and so on and so forth. Not even mentioning that actually there can only be one authoritative source of information. And like I said already, RIPE NCC is the organization that allocates autonomous system numbers and IP blocks in the first place. So RIPE NCC basically has a first-hand information of who holds which resource. Which again means that it has to be the primary source of information, and that's again what we were told by the authorities. Another novel thing introduced by the regulation is that in case of a threat to RUNET, which is the abbreviation, I guess, or not abbreviation. That's how we used to call Russian internet, RUNET. The regulator is authorized to manage traffic routing directly or by pushing the obligatory routing policies to the ISPs. I don't know if that provision or anything like that provision exists anywhere else in the world, so that might be like first time, a premiere. It hasn't been used yet, this particular mechanism, because the threat needs to be determined by the special ruling from the government. But that's a very tricky provision. And special equipment needs to be installed on the ISP's networks, and that equipment is provided by the regulator, and it's used to block content and make routing decisions in accordance with the previous message that I conveyed. And that was already field tested to throttle Twitter traffic in May 2021. As a reminder, that was the time when Twitter was not following through with the content takedown orders from the regulator, and so the decision was made to throttle Twitter's traffic to a minimum. So basically, Twitter, especially on mobile devices, was working, but it did not open media content fast at all. So since then, Twitter agreed to start blocking the content, to start taking down the content that is demanded by the government. Next is the so-called law on lending. So with that, internet companies with the daily average user number exceeding 500,000, so 500,000, must register, or land, hence the name of the law, in Russia and have full legal representation. So the current list includes the companies that are listed here. It's 13, 12 companies. As you see, those are not just the social networks, but also AliExpress, iHerb, IKEA. Again, this is not the lists that will not change. It probably might change in the future, and the reasoning for that is to be able to directly resolve content filtering issues and the issues of taxation. As you might imagine, it's pretty hard to resolve content filtering issues when a company is in California and it doesn't really care about the takedown requests. So the idea behind that is to have a local office with the local people, full legal representation in the country to be able to summon that organization to court, and so on and so forth. So it's relatively new. It was only enacted this year. Actually, it was only passed through the parliament this summer. So we are still to see how these companies are going to be reacting. Again, some of those are already incorporated in Russia. For example, TikTok is an example actually used by the regulator as the company that follows through with a lot of takedown requests, and they are having a full office in Russia, while Facebook obviously doesn't, and we're still to find out how they're gonna react to that. So this is like an revolving situation. Then the national DNS system. It's pretty interesting again. Essentially, everyone registered in the local DB, which I already mentioned when I talked about the sovereign internet law. They need to also connect to the national DNS system. And again, the idea behind that is, the official idea behind that is to be able to resolve DNS queries locally in case global DNS system becomes unavailable for some reason. So as of now, and as the regulation stands at the moment, it ain't forbidden to use other global public DNS resolvers. Although, and I'm going to be talking about that in a moment, there are issues already happening that kind of point in the direction that the national DNS system might be becoming the primary resolver for the DNS queries locally. And in September, there was the last year, there was the proposal to ban encryption protocols that mask DNS. As of now, it did not become a law or anything, any regulation or anything. And the reason for that was that those protocols, encryption protocols, like DOH, they prevent content blocking. So basically, users are able to access content that is blocked. And it was proposed that any resource that is confirmed to be using such protocols will be banned within one working day after such discovery. Again, like I said, it never became a law, and it never became a law, but this September, so less than 2 months ago, many ISPs across the country, they have reported that the Google DNS and Cloudflare DNS were unavailable. And at the same time, there were circulating documents that basically said that the ISPs are recommended to not use Google DNS and Cloudflare DNS for the purpose of resolving DNS queries. Again, this is very new, and we are still to see what would be the direct implications of that in the future, but we will, of course, be keeping an eye on it. With that said, an important question. So is Russia alone in all that? And it would be, I guess, easy to say yes, but unfortunately it's not. This is a global trend. And we see many countries actually following that same idea of digital sovereignty. We see that the internet model, as it was, the trust model, is, well, under huge test at the moment. And maybe if I may answer the question that was asked during the previous session, what's the biggest challenge? I think the biggest challenge is to find that new model of internet governance, because it doesn't seem that the status quo is going to survive. Trust is not anymore a sufficient term, and we can see that even between the allies, that is US and EU, there are a lot of issues between them. The antitrust, the privacy, the tax issues, and so on and so forth. And we see the demand for local control and sovereignty everywhere. It's coming from EU with the GDPR and Digital Services Act. It's coming from US, as you might remember last year with the previous presidential administration versus TikTok and WeChat. We see China successfully exporting its approaches to internet regulation and internet governance. So it does happen everywhere. And the issue is that I think there are more and more countries and authorities that are looking at the internet as the bordered something, as the bordered entity, while the internet by design is just distributed. And it's incredibly hard to impose that logic of borders on something that was borderless by design, such as internet. And we see that the means might be different in different countries. Like, for example, I don't know, Australia would be using different means than China, than France, than US, than Russia. But at the end, the bottom line is the desire for greater control over information flow, over the data, over the infrastructure, over the finances, over the content, and so on and so forth. And I believe that this is something that is a global trend and not just a local trend um, happening in any particular area. And again, governments, they tend to apply existing approaches to digital world, which is, like I said in the previous example, trying to say that the borders do not really apply to the way the internet was designed. Same way, we're using analog thinking like logistics, transportation, mail and telegraph, taxation of physical goods, citizen registration. We're trying to apply those long time existing approaches to the digital, and that does not stick very well. And all of that, since it's a globally happening trend, this creates a vicious circle. It self-replicates itself. Once we see that a certain country or authority proposes certain legislation, we can be sure that this does not go unnoticed by everyone else in the internet governance sphere. And we can see that a certain decision made by Australia would impact the decision-making process or thinking process, at least in EU, or decision made by US would impact the line of thinking in Russia. And that would, again, somehow resonate with the Arab-speaking world thinking about the same. So it's at the moment a circle that self-replicates itself, and there's of course no proposed reason how we can get out of that. Someone needs to stop, and that someone needs to have a lot of courage to do that, and a lot of political will. And this is an open question that I want to leave you with. What responsibility does industry bear? It's easy to say none, just to say, okay, this is not our issue. But unfortunately, that would be a very short-sighted, in my opinion, answer. And of course, I don't have an answer to that question, and I don't think anyone has or anyone would be able to draw the lines where exactly is the industry's responsibility. But I think we need to be asking ourselves that question to keep reality in check. So with that, that's me. I think I made it in time. Questions?